So I'm going to start, assuming some people might join us or might not. They might be engaged in fascinating conversations outside, because I myself have engaged in those. When I really wanted to go to a workshop, I just, didn't make it. So I'm Dave Joseph. I work at the Public Conversations Project in Watertown, Massachusetts, which is basically right next to Cambridge. And the topic this morning is about leadership, and you're going to get the 2-day workshop in an hour and a half, which is to say you're going to get a mini version, and what I'm going to choose to focus on is actually one particular aspect of leadership, which really is about a leader as the person who creates space for teams or organizations or communities to be able to engage in reflection in an atmosphere of trust that promotes collaboration. And I guess the reason that this topic is something that interests me personally is just I've worked in a lot of organizations that really sucked in terms of leadership, which is to say that there might be an organization, I know it's not MBB, and I know it's no other one that I've worked with, where people don't have differences. People always have differences. But as one of my friends said, a partner in Nigeria said that basically, he said, now that you've given this workshop, I have an understanding of what your approach is about. Better words than machetes. And that's a bit beyond most organizations that I've worked in. People haven't come to work with machetes and dealt with their differences that way, but sometimes it almost felt like that was the case. And so I think the kind of demoralization and discouragement and frustration that can come about sometimes in organizations when a leader isn't able to help engage people in a safe enough space where there is trust, where people can address their differences in a way that really promotes honest engagement, promotes self-reflection, promotes the opportunity for people to really listen to each other, and preserves relationships so that they can address the differences. That's important. It's really important. And that's what we're going to focus on here today. I really think about the fact that I was a Peace Corps volunteer 100 years ago. You didn't know they had the Peace Corps back then. And from that, what I took was the sense that every time you encounter another human being, you're having an intercultural encounter. You may not realize it, but some of the assumptions that we make often about using words like that, we often talk about those things without defining them. So you and I are having a conversation about trust, or how do we build trust within an organization and so on. And it's really pretty important to make sure that you know what somebody else means by that word, or you're going to assume they mean what you mean. And sooner or later, you may find that somebody isn't behaving in a respectful or trusting way, and you feel like they're a hypocrite, or they're this, that, or the other thing, and you lose connection, and you don't have the experience of being able to address that in a way that really promotes positive relationships, promotes open communication. So basically that's what we're going to be doing today, and what I'm going to do during the workshop is offer you some opportunities to do some reflection on your experience. You're going to work with 1 or 2 other people and do some thinking about what this whole leadership business is all about from your experience, and then we'll kind of draw that back together a bit and kind of share experiences And because it is a 2 or 3 day workshop, did I say 2? Anyway, there are 1 or 2 other things that I've got. If we want to continue discussing, that's great. If we want to kind of do a little bit deeper work, then I'm prepared to do that as well. So I'm going to stop for a minute, ask you guys if you have any questions, or if this seems like the kind of thing that, yes, you want to be here for. That's fine too. But any questions or comments? Okay. Well, let's start working then. So, yes, Bushri.
Would everyone be alright if I stepped out to see if I can? I don't know where the music is coming from, but maybe I can ask.
I think it's a really fabulous idea if you do that. Except, I want to tell you that I stepped out 15 minutes ago when I came over here. Yeah. Where it's coming from is the grand ballroom.
And they outnumber us.
They not only outnumber us, but they've got amps and drums. It's like a dance kind of whatever group.
Maybe I could try. I'll bring a machete.
There you go. If you want to try,
I'll try.
That would be great. Great.
Okay.
So, so you all have a handout, and what I want to do is just take a couple minutes to run through some core assumptions, just to frame the exercise that we're going to be doing. So you'll see on the inside page, you'll see the little diagram. At public conversations, we believe that when people get into really polarized, conflictual situations, it's often because they're in a spin cycle. And what the spin cycle involves is the relationships are stuck, the stories that people are telling each other about the experience are stuck, the conversations are just stuck. Did anybody here ever have an experience, for example, with a family member where you wanted to just say, wait, stop, just roll the tape, I'll leave, and when the tape's over, call me back, right? I mean, you knew what they were gonna say, you knew that if you said this, they were gonna say that, and it was just gonna, and it wasn't going anywhere. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about, and that happens, hi, welcome. And that happens in organizations as well. It happens in clubs. It happens in all kinds of different settings. So our belief is that the way that people, and this is, much of what we do is similar to mediation, but it's got a really different focus, actually. The focus is not so much on resolving the problem as it is on changing how people talk with one another, so that there's something fresh and new that comes out of the experience, so that people are able to start thinking outside the lines, box, whatever. And we believe that if you change the way in which people talk with one another, then it opens up these kinds of possibilities. So we have a couple people who've just joined us, that's great, and you've got a handout, and we're kind of on the second page there. So part of what we want to do is decrease stereotypes, eliminate assumptions, and we think that there are ways that you can engage people to do that through different kinds of conversation. Because, for example, anybody ever been on campus, for example, or in a town meeting or anywhere, where there's a microphone in front of the room and people are invited to come up to the microphone? And you can talk for as long as you want. All you have to do is get in line, and once you're there, it's your mic. And what kinds of things happen when you do that? What does that conversation invite? Yeah. And so people talk for a long time. Anything else?
People don't want to approach the microphone, they're too shy or...
Great. So some people are maybe kind of intimidated because they're not so comfortable, even though they might have really important things to say. Yeah.
You can't anticipate what the subject of the conversation or statement's going to be. You can't anticipate who's going to say what.
You sure can't, and sometimes people say the darndest things. Yeah.
It often doesn't invite dialogue, it's more of a monologue of someone expressing their point.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys have ever had the experience, but I have, where someone is so wise and so generous that not only will they tell you the solution to the problem, but understanding that you might not be as smart as they are, they'll kind of explain it 2 or 3 or 6 or 15 different ways just so that you get it, you know. So that's a kind of conversational structure. You know, the conversational structure is anybody can go up, anybody can talk for as long as they want, and it invite, what kind of listening does that invite?
Tuning out.
Right. So what we want to do is we want to think about how can we use a structured, the structure of a conversation, the context that's going to promote that leaders have the responsibility to create conversational structures that promote listening, that promote deep speaking, and that offer equality of voice, for example, so that everybody's viewpoint gets to be heard. So it's important to know the old conversation. We want to make sure, because if there are parts of that that work, great, but if there are parts of that that didn't work, we want to know that beforehand because we don't need to recreate that, okay? Okay, and we believe that an ounce of prevention is worth a ton of intervention. So actually, we think there's great value in talking with people beforehand and engaging them as partners to say, so what would help this conversation go well? You know, what would you need to really participate in this conversation? And we usually use some kinds of communication agreements as well when we talk with people beforehand about what those are. Like most of the groups with which we've worked say, well, if people interrupt me, I'm one of those people who might not be the first one to go up to the mic, you know, but I kind of want to say something, and if people interrupt me, then I'm going to feel like I'm just going to shut down. So a lot of groups say, well, we are going to have an agreement that we're not going to interrupt each other. Other groups talk about equalizing airtime, so everybody gets a chance to speak. Sometimes groups talk about confidentiality as a way to ensure that, you know, if I say this in this room, I'm not going to hear about it in the lunchroom tomorrow, you know, or in the grocery store, or I'm not going to find out that people are saying that, oh my God, did you hear what so-and-so said? So there's a bunch of different ways to think about how to create this safe enough space that promotes trust.
So are you saying when you refer to we, you're saying that the people who are convening this dialogue meet with the parties who are going to participate in dialogue previously and learn from them what kinds of conversations they've been having in the past and what kinds of ground rules they want to establish for the following conversation. And then you make agreements with them that you as the facilitator will monitor that, enforce that, or?
Yes, except that that if you're a leader, you can't really enforce confidentiality. I mean, ultimately,
right.
Once people walk out the room, which is why, as a leader, I would say to people, look, this is an agreement that is one that you're making, it's a commitment that you're making to each other. Are you willing to make this kind of commitment? Do you think it should be different? And ultimately, it has to be their commitment.
So in these preliminary conversations, you're eliciting from them what would make the conversation work for them, and then you're agreeing to uphold certain things as the leader, like no interrupting.
Yes, yes. Ultimately, there's both a shared responsibility. Part of what I would do as a leader would be to talk with people beforehand as much as possible, and tell them that it'll be my role to enforce them. But you know, everybody has a shared responsibility to some extent. If you slip, I'll remind you about sharing airtime with other people, for example. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the way in which we define dialogue, and this is a form that I think is really specific. This is not a problem-solving kind of approach. So on the next page where it says PCP approach to